Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Tracy Dempsey. I am with Project 10. I am the Region 1 Transition Representative, and so I cover the Panhandle. My colleague is also with me for Region 3, and I'll let him introduce himself.
And hello, I'm Franklin Coker. I'm also with Project 10, a regional transition representative and Tracy's colleague, and I represent 10 school districts or LEAs in the Central Florida area. And so we're really excited to be here and present on this annual virtual, this time virtual family cafe event on transition basics.
Yes, so welcome and thank you for joining us for today's presentation of Transition Basics, Information for Families and All who support students with disabilities. Next slide. Today, we hope to achieve our goal of helping you to learn more about the transition process, the secondary transition process, and also introduce you to ways that you can actively be involved in this process. Next slide. It is important to note that the transition IEP is not a new IEP. It's not new in theory. Rather, as a student gets older, the transition IEP contains more information on transition. The IEP and the transition IEP all aim towards transition and the course of study. That's all that the student is doing in school to be successful after graduation. So you, as participants, will also learn about available resources. Next slide.
And the research on the importance of family involvement couldn't be stronger. It is shown that family involvement has consistently revealed that families have an enormous impact on students. The information in this presentation over the next 50 minutes or so will empower you, the family, and parents by providing you knowledge and information to collaborate with schools in a way that benefit your children. So family in middle school and high school, research indicates that you have families have a multitude of impact variables in which you can play to make sure and to ensure that students have a post-school outcome full of success. So family members, parents, and other caring adults and stakeholders promote social, emotional, physical, academic, and occupational growth of your youth, leading them, of course, to better post-school outcomes. Findings indicate that with your involvement, and not just K through 5, but especially during the middle school and high school years, that when you engage and you involve yourselves into your children's academic, social, and emotional success at school, it increases grades, it increases their student success and school outcomes, higher test scores, higher self-esteem, social competence, reduction in substance abuse, interests and aspirations for college and enrollment in college, and then participation in out-of-school programs. So what we're now going to discuss is this global umbrella term called transition services. So we will define for you and provide examples of what all that it entails when we talk about transition services during middle school and high school years.
Thank you, Franklin. So the term transition services means a coordinated set of activities for a child with a disability that is designed to be within a results-oriented process that is focused on improving the academic and functional achievement of the child with a disability to facilitate the child's movement from school to post-school activities. And that includes college, vocational education, or independent living. Focusing on academic achievement means we want to ensure the student has achieved his or her educational goals in reading, math, science, social studies, but it also wants to focus on functional achievement. And that means ensuring the student is progressing in the areas of, let's say, motor skills, social interaction, communication, personal living skills, community living skills, and just overall independence. Next slide. So all of these coordinated activities make up transition services. These services are based on the needs of a student, including their strengths, preferences, and interests. Vocational rehabilitation also provides services to students with disabilities while they're still in high school that help prepare them for employment, such as career exploration counseling, work readiness training, self-advocacy training, post-secondary educational counseling, also community-based work experiences. So vocational rehabilitation can also support all of those as well. This slide is an example of what transition services provided to your student during high school may look like. Related services may include counseling, occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech and language services, or transportation. Daily living skills may include cooking, money management, and self-care. You as a parent should work with the school ESC personnel to ensure that needed services are included on the transition IEP. This is one of my favorite graphics, as it places transition assessment within the larger umbrella of transition. Transition assessment is the first and foremost so that your students' strengths, preferences, needs, and interests can be captured. This information is then used within the context of current and future post-secondary goals for education, employment, and independent living. And I just want to highlight that the student is central in each phase of this process.
So there are really two ages that are important to think about as a family, as a parent, and as a student, really, about what happens compliant-wise and individual education plan-wise when we talk about transition. So the first age is prior to turning 14. There are certain pieces, criteria that need to happen, that need to be discussed and talked about at those annual individual education plan meetings. Such as by the age of 14, discussion of post-secondary goals and career goals need to occur. So when you think post-secondary goals, career goals, you're thinking, I know it sounds crazy because you're only 13 years old at this point when we talk about before 14, but we're talking about after graduation from high school, leaving high school, whenever that is, 18, 19, 20, 21 years old, that's the discussion when we talk about post-secondary goals and career goals. So we talk about it that early. Yes, indeed, we have to. Also, the consideration of the student's need for instruction in self-determination and self-advocacy. So we'll talk about this a little bit later, what that means, but really talking about understanding your personal strengths, those planning pieces, how to communicate and advocate for oneself. We need to consider and talk about that general concept prior to age 14. Also consider the fact that the goal is ultimately, for as much as possible, to the extent as possible, that student will conduct their own IEP meetings. So we want them, they're the center of our world when it comes to why we have these meetings. So we'd love for them to be a participant and advocate on their behalf. That's the ultimate goal. Also, prior to age 14, the discussion of diploma designations in the IEP meeting and determining if that student will work, the determination that that student will work towards one. So special diploma has been repealed as of 6 years ago. So everyone is earning a standard diploma. It just becomes a question of how, what exactly, what courses, what track are we looking at in terms of how that student will be earning that standard diploma. In addition, scholar and merit designations and additions are additions to the standard diploma, and we discuss those. And the decision is determined by the parent or the student if the rights have transferred. The other age that we think about in terms of compliance and activities, in terms of transition and those individual education plan meetings, is prior to the age of 16, so 2 years later. So by the age of 16, additional pieces need to be talked about and inputted into that individual education plan. And what are those things? Here they are. It is the actual statement of intent to pursue that standard diploma and determining whether a scholar and or a merit designation are going to be pursued. That statement is actually now built into that individual education plan. Also, a statement of intent to receive that standard diploma, and which requirements and course requirements and track, if you will, which methodology are we going to pursue in terms of how we're going to get that standard diploma. Because as you'll see in a couple slides, you'll see that there's a couple of routes or pathways to get that standard diploma. And then the final thing that happens by the age of 16 is a statement of measurable post-secondary goals and career goals are required. So we're really looking at post-secondary goals, so goals again after leaving high school, in employment, career, independent living, and education and training. So all of those have to be written in such a way that are measurable, observable, and included in that plan for your student's future. So those are required by law. So it's actually in state statute that these things have to happen. And what you might have seen is in some of these words are bolded. They're actually bolded because those are the most recent changes by statute back when the special diploma was repealed in 2014. So we just include that because those might be relatively new if you were a parent and you had older kids and they went through school, or you yourself went through school several years ago. These are the kind of things that kind of change based on state statute and legislation. And finally, when it comes to those transition requirements, if there are changes to any of those career goals or post-secondary goals, then of course the parent, must approve those changes. And if you did not attend the meeting or could not attend the meeting at that live meeting, then the IEP team will be sending you home information in which you can provide feedback and input on whether you agree or do not agree to the changes that were made on those post-secondary goals. And if you do not approve, and you with the team and what the decisions they have made, you have those procedural safeguards and rights that are available to you. And at the very least, at the end, if there is no consensus, which we don't like to have, we like to work, the school district and the parent and the family, we work really hard to make sure that there's a consensus and agreement. But at the end of the day, if there's still some disagreement, then of course you as the parent may choose an independent reviewer to help you to decide if changes are appropriate for those recommendations that were made at that IEP meeting.
Thank you, Franklin.
Tracy, go ahead.
Thank you. So let's please remember that all students with disabilities have the opportunity, the option to pursue a standard diploma. Students will not be placed in general education courses without needed supports. Students will receive need regardless of the class setting. So in the state of Florida, we have a standard diploma, and there's multiple ways or multiple pathways in which to get that standard diploma. Next slide. Here we have the available pathways that I just mentioned to a standard diploma. Successful transition requires much planning, as we all know, and decision making. One of the most important decisions is the type of standard diploma that your student will work toward. The student and the family make this diploma decision with the IEP team based on the student's needs, preferences, interests, and goals. It is important that students and families be fully informed about diploma pathways because the student's opportunities for employment, further education and training, maybe they want to go into the military service after graduation, all of that may depend on the diploma that the student earns. Certain pathways to a standard diploma may not meet all of the requirements for particular programs, particular schools, particular universities, particular training, so on and so forth. So for example, required coursework and entrance exam results are required for colleges and universities. So make sure that you are a part of that decision-making process at the IEP meeting. Students with disabilities may also pursue a scholar or merit designation. And my colleague Franklin mentioned this a little while ago, a few slides back. So this slide that you see in front of you shows the requirements for the scholar and merit designations. Remember, at age 16, this is now a part of their IEP. Some students may meet the requirements for both diploma designations, both the scholar and the merit. Please note that students who waive any of the statewide testing assessments, because waivers are available for students with disabilities, they're not eligible to pursue a scholar designation. However, they may be able to meet the requirements for a merit designation. Another pathway to a standard diploma is the academic and employment-based courses. Oh, I'm sorry. I jumped.
That's okay. We're going to cover that. We're going to cover that, Tracy, next.
I'm going to come back to mine.
To do that, we're going to squeeze in one of the pathways besides the 24 credit standard diploma that Tracy just provided you. We are now going to talk about the standard diploma via access courses. And so what that means is that it's still students with disabilities are meeting the same 24 course credit requirements as all other students that Tracy just talked about. So those 4 ELA credits, English Language Arts credits, those 4 math credits, those 3 science credits, et cetera, et cetera. It's all the same buckets, but now we're fulfilling those by taking them via access points. And so what access points or access curricula does is modify the standards to meet the needs of students with more complex or significant disabilities. And so in order to earn this pathway, in order to go on this track, it's an IEP team-based decisions, and it typically involves a host of data and assessments to verify that indeed that student with a disability has significant cognitive disabilities that require a modified curriculum to meet those standard diploma outcomes. And so there's been no change in who takes these courses or how you're eligible. It still remains the same, that it's an IEP team decision based on a host of data. But what's nice is it parallels and matches the same requirements that every other student is taking. So when we say, well, you need an algebra course, guess what? Students on Access, they too need an algebra course. It's just Access algebra. And oh, a student needs to take an end of course exam because it's required for US history. Well, guess what? Students on Access, they're taking a final exam. They're taking that end of course exam. It just happens to match and mirror their Access history course. So it's nice in that they're parallel in that way. One additional feature, which is kind of nice and is detailed in state statute, is the availability of students who are on Access courses earning their standard diploma to substitute certain career and technical education courses for some of those buckets that I mentioned earlier, whether they fall in math or ELA or science or social studies. There is an option to substitute some of those more hands-on application-based CTE courses for one of those required 24 credit courses that we talked about. However, there are some caveats. So for example, if it's a state end of course exam course, such as found in algebra, geometry, biology, or US history, students on Access courses need to take those specific Access courses and cannot substitute for CTE courses. But all the other ones, they can. And the FDOE, the Florida Department of Education, must approve along with the district processes in order to see which courses are substitutable for which other courses. And you can find some of that guidance on the state website. We've included the CTE course substitutions. And I would recommend that you get in contact with some of your exceptional student education leaders in your district, because they too are looking at those courses and seeing the alignment, so that way they can offer those course substitutions. And as we know, if you're a student on Access family, if you have a student who's on Access points and they happen to be in those career and technical education courses, they can be modified, because students on Access are allowed those modifications as needed per their requirements in their individual, as stated in their individual education plan. All right. And the last piece with the Access courses, then I'll hand it back over to that exciting academic and employment route that Tracy was excited about, and I am too. But for those standard Access courses, for the standard diploma via Access courses, while the rest of all the students, including students with disabilities and gen ed students, while they're taking those big Florida standards assessments, those FSAs, every year to measure their progress, and then a big test comes like around the 10th grade level to see for their graduation component, they've got to pass that a certain level. Students on Access, my gosh, they're taking an equivalent exam in terms of its importance, but it happens to be called FSAA, or Florida Standards Alternate Assessment. So that's how they're measured, because remember, they're on a different curriculum, they're modified, so we have a different assessment to measure those results. So they still do the best that they can on that high stakes test. And please know, as with all students with disabilities, the IEP team can assess after the fact of a test being taken by a student with a disability, whether that performance on that test was an accurate reflection. And then we have this, there's a process called waivers of assessment results that an IEP team can do. And that goes for students on Access as well. So, but more information can be found on Florida Standards Alternate Assessment by following or using those links at the bottom of this slide. And we'll include that in your upload for your PowerPoint. Okay? Lots of information here, so you can watch this a couple times. All right, now Tracy, I know you're excited.
Now I can jump in. So another pathway to a standard diploma is via the academic and employment-based courses. So this diploma, students must meet the same 24 credit requirements as all students. They also must earn at least 1/2 credit in an employment-based course. It must be paid employment, and documented achievement of the components on an employment transition plan has to be met, and the student, parent, and employer has to sign this. So the employment transition plan must be developed again and signed by the student, parent, teacher, and employer before placement in an employment, and must identify the following. What are the expected academic and employment competencies? What industry certifications, if any? What occupational completion points will be acclaimed? The criteria for determining and certifying mastery of the competencies, the work schedule, the minimum number of hours to work per week needs to be identified on the transition plan. A description of the supervision to be provided by the school district must also be identified on the employment transition plan. In the bottom left-hand corner is a template for the employment transition plan. Districts are able to create their own, but DOE, the Florida Department of Education, has this template available to districts if they need it. Also, continuing with the standard diploma via academic and employment-based courses, students may also substitute a CTE course with content related for English 4, 1 math, 1 science, and 1 social studies. Let's remember that those important EOC tested courses such as algebra, geometry, biology, US history cannot be course substituted. The Florida Department of Education must approve content related, and students may get a waiver of statewide standardized test results. Part of legislation involves a process for deferring receipt of the standard diploma. We're going to talk about that in more detail over the next few slides.
Thank you, Tracy. So yeah, one of my favorite routes or methods is that really cool employment academic pathway. I get really excited about that because the opportunities and flexibility with some of those pieces. So I get excited too. So I wanted to share that. So, but now we're talking about deferment. So as Tracy indicated, this word deferment is legislatively designed because remember 6 years ago when state legislation repealed the special diploma and now introduced ways for all students to earn standard diplomas. And now that is the expectation for all of our students, that traditionally students that used to earn special diplomas would keep getting services until really they age out, you know, at 22 years old. And so because everyone is now earning standard diplomas, deferment is that process that needs to happen in order for students to continue to receive services through age 22 if they happen to get their standard diploma, even access standard diploma, which is a standard diploma, prior to 22. So that's why that deferment word exists and that process exists. And it's really to ensure that free and appropriate public education continues after earning the credentials for a standard diploma, but yet not necessarily the student's not going to receive their standard diploma at that moment. So if they decide to defer. So that's why there's some background there. And so it is legislatively written and coded in that process. And really what it is in that final year of a student with a disability that's on track. You're a senior, you might be 18 years old, 17 years old, 19 years old, whatever age you are in that final year in which you're about to earn the credentials to obtain your standard diploma in one of those pathways we talked about. That is the semester, that spring semester of your final year, in which deferment is going to be kind of talked about and decided and agreed upon from that IEP standpoint. Okay, and of course you as family or adult age student now, because remember now we're talking almost 18 years old for many of you, you will be the important contributor towards signing off and agreeing that deferment decision is what you would indeed want to do if found eligible. So really there, between January 30th, specifically between January 30th and May 15th is that window of time that happened in your spring semester of your senior year in terms of deciding eligibility for deferment of your standard diploma and continuing free and appropriate public education. All right. So I mentioned the word eligible, like who's eligible? Is every student eligible? Well, most students, including students with disabilities, of course, don't need free and appropriate public education. They don't beyond their earning of their standard diploma because they're ready to go on to college, they're ready to go on to work, they're ready to move on to the next step in their life. But for some students, that deferment is needed because there remains additional services, supports, and gaps in order to reach their post-secondary goals that were designed in their individual education plan. And so the first prong of eligibility happens to be related to the fact that you must be a student with a disability, you must have an individual education plan, and it must be written in a way that prescribes transition planning, transition services, or related services through age 21. So that's the first prong, okay? The second prong of eligibility, again, to be decided in that spring semester of your senior year, but you're allowed to kind of think about it and talk about it prior to then. But that second prong is regarding why you would defer. What is the purpose? What is the reason? What are the skills? What are we working towards if we decide to find eligible to defer and continue to receive services and supports? What does that next year look like, or the year after? What is that between 19 and 21? What are we working on? And so the state actually set out categories of reasons about which programs we would defer for and then be able to be more post-high school ready, whether it becomes life, independent functioning, academics, career, employment, etc. So here are the 5 reasons: accelerated college credit instruction, industry certification and college credit needs, maybe enrollment in a collegiate high school program or completion of a collegiate high school program such as IB or ACE, courses for a scholar designation. Maybe you've had a couple of courses leading up to scholar designation and you need a couple more. And so that FAPE will continue to support that, so that way you can get that credential. Or you can defer to enroll in a structured work-study, internship, or pre-apprentice program. So one of those reasons would be a reason that the individual education plan meeting would have to decide on, and then what that would look like following deferment, okay? Oh, and one more thing about this. Each district may have different kinds of program availabilities depending on where you're located, which school you're at, etc. So if you happen to reside in a community or a district that has many partnerships with local colleges, there might be different kinds of programs available specifically for students with disabilities and deferment. While others might have businesses or local employment institutes that work closely with students with disabilities to get them more job ready. And then again, other districts might have school-based programs that differ from 9 through 12 typical programs to get them more work ready and more hands-on approaches. So we recommend that you talk with your school district and your school specifically to see what options and availabilities students who defer can enroll in and be part of. So just some final comments over the next slide here about deferment, just to keep in mind, is that deferment is an IEP-based decision, and there's some eligibility pieces required and some processes that need to be talked about and looked at by the team. And so simply not attending your graduation, whether it's in May or June of your senior year, simply not attending does not mean that you get to defer. You've actually had to have made that decision as an IEP team, and then participating in and being involved with all those senior activities, including graduation, is a district-based decision. So those are two separate events. So please know that. Students who earn a standard diploma and do not defer are not eligible for further services. So if you do not take advantage of that opportunity to defer and get additional services, and then you take receipt of your standard diploma, you obtain it, then that contract is over in order for that district to provide free and appropriate public education and additional transition services. It's over. So please know that, that's important to remember. And then the final bullet on this point, or this slide, is that students may request that their high school diploma be received by them at any point after deferment. So deferment is a one-time event that happens in that January to May senior spring semester. But once that deferment is made and signed off and agreed on, you do not have to continue to defer in the future. But until you age out, where FAPE automatically ends at age 22, the other way that it ends is because the adult student comes to school and requests that they receive their standard diploma in hand. And once that request is made and the diploma is handed over, that basically ends free and appropriate public education. So that's the other way that FAPE ends for deferred students, okay? And with that, and we have some more resources at the end of our slide and things to look at on our project and website about deferment. So I know it's a big hot topic. So please know that. And now I'm going to hand it over to Tracy and begin us with responsibilities of the important stakeholders of students, families, and schools.
Thank you, Franklin. So as a former ESE teacher, a former ESE specialist, I would always end an IEP meeting with the people at the table with just summarizing who was responsible for what, right? Because we all shared responsibilities amongst the activities in that IEP. So the next 3 slides, we're going to address the responsibilities of students, responsibilities of families, and the responsibilities of schools during secondary transition. So student responsibilities. Students also have responsibilities during the transition planning process. These might include, first of all, understanding what it is. And so providing that instruction, providing that information at the school level is very, very important. Actively participating in their IEP meetings. We definitely want them at the table at least by the age of 14. If not 14, then definitely by the age of 16. Taking an active role in developing the IEP, participating, co-leading, and then eventually leading it all together is very, very important, and that is our ultimate goal. We also want students to share the responsibility of, or having the responsibility of thinking about what he or she wants to do and where he or she wants to do it in the years immediately after school. Learning more about his or her disability and how to get the service and supports that he or she needs to achieve long-term goals. Going to class. Something as simple as going to class is a responsibility of the student. Completing homework assignments, also very, very important. Developing and using the self-determination and self-advocacy skills that they learn in school is very, very important and will lead to actually leading the IEP meeting. Again, our ultimate goal. All of these examples can be addressed in the student's IEP. The family has responsibilities as well. The family provides most of the day-to-day support for their child from birth to adult life. So therefore, the family should take an active role in the transition process, right? We want to ask questions. They want to make suggestions. Some specific roles that families play in the transition process include maintaining records, reviewing the IEP goals after the IEP meeting, before the IEP meeting, during the IEP meeting, helping their student develop post-secondary goals, reviewing graduation requirements, and helping make decisions about diploma options. And then, of course, very important as well is if there's any changes in the IEP regarding post-secondary goals or diploma decision, the parent must approve those. Families can also support students in writing personal letters of invitation. For teachers and agency personnel, this is an example, and it can get the student very, very involved. They can invite the agency personnel, the teachers, to attend his or her IEP meeting. Help their child develop a portfolio that includes an updated IEP, maybe some assessment scores, how your child learns, grade point average, class rank, honors, so on and so forth. So you want to help guide your student in decision making and match the support needs related to the transfer of rights at age 18.
And thank you, Tracy. And the school also has responsibilities. So what are those primary responsibilities that the school has in terms of the individual education plan and supporting your student with a disability? Well, first and foremost, the school district has the main responsibility to make sure that the IEP components are being addressed. There are definitely compliant factors and quality factors that need to happen according to state law and federal and regulations that require certain elements to be talked about, discussed at those individual education plan meetings. So the school district is also responsible for inviting agencies to meetings with consent if the agency is to provide services. It is important to know that if consent is not provided by you, the school is not able to invite the agency. The school district is also responsible to ensure that students learn self-determination and self-advocacy skills. So what Tracy just talked about self-advocacy, self-determination, and by the way, we're going to cover that in a little bit more in depth about what that is. But schools are responsible for ensuring that opportunities and learning exist for students to achieve those skills that are really needed to support a high quality of life once they leave high school. So, and finally, speaking of those compliant requirements that state statute and federal laws require IEP teams and schools to follow, the other element about that, the partner element with that is making sure that procedures are followed. So when you get notices in the mail in advance, when we reach out to you on several occasions to try to get your input, when we the schools are bound to follow protocol and procedures to ensure that high quality has been made and opportunities exist for you, the family member, and the student to partner as closely as possible with the writing and the track of your son or daughter's individual education plan and their high school experience, their middle and high school experience. So please know that. So who are these required team members that we talk about? Is it just two people sitting around a table making all kinds of decisions? Or is it more than that? What is it? Who are required to be part of this? Well, first and foremost, the student. The student's the very reason why individual education plans exist. And it really is a personal, individualized narrative about what that student, what their goals are, what their services are, their needs, and their dreams, and how that blueprint on how to get that, and how the school and all the partners are going to fulfill that contract. So of course the student is a required IEP team member. And as the student ages, and as that student becomes more comfortable in those self-advocacy, self-determination, they truly should be a bigger and bigger part and role in those IEP meetings to the extent as possible. Who else is required? The parents, you, the parents, family members, legal guardians. You, until that student turns 18, you're making all those consent decisions. And even when that student turns 18, you're still a vital part, because that partnership and that support, it continues well beyond that student's 18th birthday. So know that you are a critical element all along that way. LEA, when we talk LEA, we talk local education agency representatives. Usually those are designees. It could be a teacher, it could be an administrator, it could be another staff or educator, but basically they're the ones designated to facilitate and run an individual education plan meeting, and they're responsible for ensuring that those processes and protocols are complete, okay? Special education teacher, general education teacher. A lot of times, most of the time, our students with disabilities are enrolled in a lot of general education settings, and they're getting taught by general education teachers with support from special ed teachers, of course. But typically, there's at least two teachers, both gen ed and special ed, that are heavily involved with your son or daughter's or your student's education plan. So they're required. And then who else? Well, an individual who can interpret any kind of instructional implication assessments or formal or informal assessments, they're needed. Individuals who have knowledge or special expertise regarding the student. So it could be a school counselor, it could be a mentor, anybody that's closely working with that student that has knowledge and can support input would be a required IEP team member. And then of course, with your consent, we talked about agency representation. Speaking of agency representation, we just wanted to list several, just to give you a clue, a concept about who we're talking about. Some popular ones, of course, would be VR, Division of Voc Rehab, especially if they're a client of VR, then we'd want to make sure that they're invited with your consent, because they probably have a lot of cool, important things to say about job readiness and skills. Agency for Persons with Disabilities, Centers for Independent Living, etc. You can see these lists. And there are way more than this, but these are the heavy hitters that are probably common among all around the state. So no matter where you are, these important agencies are likely going to be pivotal in some way or another with your student with a disability. And again, they can only be invited if we get consent from you, the legal guardian or parent, okay? And then who are these other possible IEP team members? So thinking outside the box a little bit, as your student gets older and is now becoming a junior, a senior, they're reaching the age of majority, 18 years old, etc. We want to think about those folks that have never really been at the forefront of our IEP team member list, but now they might be really pivotal because they've got some information to share, and we think that they're going to be important. And those are because we're going to link our student right to these folks. Once they leave high school, they're going to be in the adult world, and these folks might come into play here. So representatives from college, universities, Office of Disability Services, Career and Tech, Adult Education, Job Corps, AmeriCorps, those areas, domains would be just thinking outside the box. They might be really cool IEP team members to consider and to consent and agree upon to be part of that discussion, okay? All right, now we're gonna go into, we talked a couple times now about self-determination, self-advocacy, but what exactly is it? So Tracy?
Thank you, Franklin. You'll go to the next graphic or the next slide. So the graphic that you see here demonstrates that self-determination has many components. By the way, this was adapted from Virginia Department of Education's self-determination project called I'm Determined. And so in it, you see self-determination as the big umbrella and all of the components below it. And self-determination includes all that you see, such as choice making. So pretty self-explanatory, right? The skill of making a choice between two known options. It also includes problem solving, the skill used when a solution is not readily known. Decision making and choice making are part of that decision making process. It also includes self-regulation, the process of monitoring one's own actions. And then, of course, self-instruction, skills that assist the student in using his or her own verbal prompts for solving problems. Self-determination is included in that. Self-advocacy is included in that. And so is self-efficacy. So the conviction that one can successfully execute the behavior required to produce a given outcome. So lots and lots of components under self-determination. And that's why we start teaching and instructing self-determination and self-advocacy early on, so that they have years of practice before they graduate high school. So how can families support self-determination? Several ways. Families should have, first of all, high expectations and communicate them often to their child. Families should also support that their child support their child to achieve his or her goals, including getting a job, going on to college, having some kind of vocational program in their future. They should also help students to direct their own IEP to the greatest extent possible. This may include sending invitations, as I mentioned before, to IEP team members. Families can also provide opportunities to practice decision making, such as deciding where to eat, maybe what leisure activities they want to engage in and with whom, maybe choose the movie for movie night or the game for game night. So allowing your child to make those decisions supports the theory of self-determination.
So self-advocacy skills, in terms of being an effective self-advocate, what we expect students to learn is how and what to advocate. So if we get them to understand how to advocate, so in other words, the assertiveness level needed to advocate, the effective communication required to advocate to a given audience, verbal, written, pictures, whatever skill set the student has and can bring to the table, and also with consideration to what's required for the audience to understand the needs of that student. So it's that combination effect. Negotiation, yeah, there's a lot of negotiation skills that we do every day that you may not think of, whether it's at the grocery store, whether it's buying something, requesting assistance, calling someone up to make sure you're on the eligibility list in some way. There are ways to navigate that get better outcomes for us. And for students with disabilities, when they become adults, it's really important for them to get what they need. And so negotiation comes into play here. So that's a really, I didn't know if, it doesn't come right off the bat that negotiation is a advocacy skill, but it is. And then compromise, my gosh, that's gonna be key, especially now, right? 2020. How do we teach our young folks as they become adults and become independent, how to compromise in real world situations, when to compromise, when not to compromise. It goes a long way to understand those differences. And that's another measure of advocacy, appropriate advocacy. Now that's how, but then as far as now, there's a component of what do we need to advocate? Well, there's lots of things to need to advocate. Obviously your personal needs on what you require to be healthy, but also like eating and your medicine and medication and your needs in terms of communication and safety, right? Those are all pieces of what to advocate. But I also want you to think about our students need to understand what their rights and responsibilities are under federal mandates and laws, because that means that we're speaking the same language. Those students are speaking the same language as businesses and colleges and other adults, right? Because we all operate under those same rules. So our students, young adults with disabilities, need to understand their rights and responsibilities law-wise under IDEA, as long as they're a student, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And then when they're no longer a student, Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA. What does that mean? And the more they know, the more they understand, and the better they can advocate to those around them. And then they also need to know what is our general rights that are available to all citizens. So I bet there are a lot of rights that they may not be aware of that they should be afforded. So if the better understanding, then they're going to be able to be more successful in achieving their post-school outcomes and their post-school goals that we've worked so hard to write and get for them. With their, of course, with their input, the students' input, it's their goals, not our goals for them, but their goals. So we talked about how and what, but where? Where are these opportunities for students to advocate? Well, first and foremost, at the very least, we're wanting students to advocate in their individual education plan meetings. So these are typically those annual meetings that talk about the blueprint for their future and then their present levels of performance and any gaps that may exist between those two. And so, and what they need, what they don't need, things like that. It's really pivotal for our students to showcase those self-advocacy skills in those meetings. So whether it's what do you want to be when you get older? What school might you want to go to? Do you want to live by yourself or not? What help do you need? All those students understanding their needs and advocating for them in an IEP meeting make that blueprint better, that IEP plan, individual education plan better. Classes, advocate for what classes you want, what classes you like. I mean, too often we're just looking at, let's see, we got to fill out a schedule. So we'd love for that student to say, I really like this. I really like, cooking. I really like mechanics. I don't like math, so I'm going to need more help in math. That kind of thing. We need those opportunities for students to express their needs and wants for those courses. Now look at that word accommodations. That's going to be key because as you know, or as you hopefully know, students with disabilities as part of their individual education plan get those needed environmental accommodations to succeed and level that playing field with their non-disabled peers. So things like, for example, an accommodation might be extended time or different kind of queuing systems to get them back on task, or environmental controls of noise and space and time limits, things like that. Those are accommodations. So we want our students as they become older to be able to identify which accommodations work for them, which ones don't, which ones they need. And then if they need something, how do they communicate that effectively to their teacher? While the teacher's going to work really hard to get those for them because it's part of the IEP team and it's required, it really goes a long way if that student can have a good communication system with the teacher to get those accommodations. Work experience and employment, including interviewing, obviously that's going to be a place where students have to advocate in order to get a job. And then campus and community experiences, communicating in extracurricular activities, planning family activities, and just socializing and having friends. People have got to be able to have those skills to communicate with their peers. And those are all opportunities and places for students to showcase their self-advocacy skills and for us to learn and train and work on those too. And now we're going to go into exploring post-school options. I'm going to hand it over to Tracy. But when we think post-school, remember, we're thinking not after 4 o'clock that day, but we're thinking after leaving high school. After leaving high school, then these are the big buckets that we think about as a parent, as a family, and as an individual education plan team. Universities and colleges, employment, career and tech centers, living, independent living and living arrangements, recreation and leisure, and community service. So go ahead, Tracy.
Thank you, Franklin. So as Franklin mentioned, those big buckets, we want to talk about how families can support those big buckets. How can they promote, you as a family can promote post-secondary education? And as mentioned previously, it's important for students and families to understand, first of all, diploma options. A student planning to attend a four-year college and obtain a degree should be working toward a standard diploma in high school, cut and dry. For example, a student's plan to attend maybe, I don't know, a career and technical college, they're going to require a different course of study than a student who plans to attend a four-year university. So be sure that you understand what the student's diploma options are and what your student is pursuing or what your student wants to pursue, because you want to support that. Families should assist their child in researching different technical programs, which are vocational programs, colleges, universities. What are the requirements? What support is available for students with disabilities? And whenever possible, if you can schedule visits to these college campuses, these vocational college campuses. Sometimes the school can prepare these visits to college campuses as well. Explore costs and financing options. So post-secondary education is costly, it's expensive. However, there are financing options. Families should work with their child to find out the cost of the programs, maybe research requirements, the pros, the cons on different financing options. And again, as discussed with self-determination, it's important for individuals with disabilities to know their strengths and their needs. They should also be aware of what strategies have been helpful and what methods should be avoided. The last bullet we're going to talk about a little bit further in the next slide, discussing disclosure. So the importance of disclosing a disability and requesting accommodations. Students with disabilities who leave high school and enroll in college are treated as an adult. So please remember that. They are responsible for disclosing their disability and completing college requirements before they can get accommodations. High school and post-secondary education differ in terms of disability law and expectations for students and institutions. So for example, in high school, students with disabilities are entitled to a free and appropriate public education, also called FAPE, as you see in the parentheses. Under IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the Transition IEP provides what is needed, for example, accommodations and individual assistance. But in college, however, students with disabilities are served under the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. Students must first disclose their disability and then meet eligibility requirements by providing documentation demonstrating that they have a disability and the accommodations that they need. These differences highlight the importance of disclosing a disability and going through the process with the college and the university's Disability Services Office if a student wants accommodations and support at college or at the post-secondary level. Families can also promote employment. So we've talked about responsibilities, and we're summarizing all of the responsibilities for the parent, for the student, for the teacher, for the school, so on and so forth. So we're going to talk a little bit about how families can also promote employment. So employment is just a natural expectation, right? We're born, we grow up, we go to school, we go to work, right? It's a natural expectation, and it should be supported for students with disabilities as well. There are different ways that families can promote employment. For example, exploring career interests through hands-on activities, observation, online resources. Work experience can be paid, it can be non-paid, and it can be gathered through different methods such as internship, apprenticeship, volunteering. Each community has a variety of supports and services. Some examples are the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. Maybe your child's high school has a high school high-tech program. Maybe it has a mentoring program. Not all schools have these, but most do. Many students and their families fear a loss of benefits if the student begins earning a paycheck, and that's understandable, but all counties have supports for benefits planning. Families may contact their Social Security Administration area work incentive coordinator, maybe the work incentive liaison can provide more information regarding benefits planning. Also, the Project 10 website, project10.info, has a section for district resources related to employment.
Thank you, Tracy. And with that, and I love how you close with our amazing Project 10 website. And I say amazing. I know it sounds like a self-fulfilling prophecy and conflict of interest, right? Because we're part of Project 10, but it truly is a wealth of resources. Because if you go to that website, we see questions and answers here, questions, and our answers are found on our website often, and you can actually locate your district wherever you live in the state of Florida. You can find out who your district representative is for Project 10, and then reach out to them with an email or a phone call with anything that we've talked about today. If you wanted to follow up, we can hook you up with the answer or with the link to a person in your district that can support you. We wanted to thank you because we covered a lot of information. We went from basically age 14 all the way to post-school outcomes, and we have a wealth of resources. And two that I just wanted to highlight real quick, on our website, if you wanted to look at that family guide to secondary transition planning for students with disabilities and our transition roadmap, our secondary transition roadmap. Those two resources on our website would be phenomenal to complement and support what we talked about today. So we appreciate you. We thank you for listening and taking an hour of your time, and have a great virtual family cafe.
Thank you, Franklin.
And I'll leave us here with our Tracy and I's contact information.